Submarines on the edge. The nuclear torpedo nobody in Washington knew about. Beneath the quarantine line, 4 Foxtrots fought heat, pressure, and time. B-59, B-36, B-130, B-4. Diesel-electric sent on a mission called Karma, told to lurk near Cuba and be ready to break a line they weren't allowed to acknowledge. Each carried 22 torpedoes. One was special, a T-5 with a nuclear warhead around 10-15 kilotons, sealed in a green safe that needed keys and consent. No one in Washington factored that into rules of engagement written for cat and mouse. The stakes inside those hulls were physical before they were geopolitical. Temperatures climbed to 45-50 degrees Celsius. Condensation fell like rain. CO2 thickened the air until lungs felt weighted. Batteries ran down as boats tried to stay deep and quiet. Food tasted like diesel. Nerves frayed. Sonar pings and shallow, signaling, charges turned steel into a drum. Each thud asked a question in a language the Americans thought was clear and the Soviets read as threat. Action finds B-59 on the day sailors would later call Black Saturday, October 27, 1962. Destroyers above, including USS Beale and USS Kenai, tightened a contact and dropped small charges preset shallow. On paper, the pattern meant surface and identify. Inside B-59, the hull rang, bulbs popped, men flinched. Captain Valentin Savitsky read the percussion as attack. The political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, agreed and had one half of a key to the safe. The written guidance they carried: defend the boat if attacked. If cut off and war has started, act, offered enough space for fear. Impact hinged on a third man. As Brigade Chief of Staff, Vasili Arkhipov carried authority beyond his rank. He'd been on K-19 when a reactor leak cooked men alive to save their ship. He'd seen panic multiply mistakes. Now he watched sweat run down Savitsky's face, heard arm the special, and put a wall in the way. Not grand, just firm. He argued the pings were signals, not killing depth charges. He said surfacing could clarify the picture and save the crew. He added a harder truth: batteries were dying. Without air, they'd be blind and dead in the water. The doctor was already pushing salt tablets at men whose hands shook. Meanwhile, something else pressed. The safe needed unanimity on B-59, captain, political officer, brigade chief of staff. On the other boats, 2 signatures could suffice. Here, 3. That procedural quirk met a man unwilling to let a misread thud become a white flash under a destroyer group. Savitsky paced. Maslenikov nodded toward the safe. Arkhipov kept saying what sounded like a stall and was actually strategy. One more turn to cooler water, one more hour, then we decide with air in our lungs and light in our eyes. The stakes outside the hull were brutal. A nuclear torpedo detonated under a carrier or a pack of destroyers would vaporize ships and pull SAC into a script nobody could stop. An underwater flash would look like the deliberate opening of nuclear war. In Washington, the quarantine would turn into LeMay's airstrikes and likely into an invasion. In Moscow, seeing a sun under the sea, pressure to answer in Europe would spike. One misread signal could turn a cramped argument into a continental fire. Action slowed because the math forced it. Voltage sagged. CO2 alarms chirped. An engineer gave a number that sounded like a verdict, minutes to critical levels. Arkhipov used the arithmetic. Blow tanks, surface, breathe. If they're killing us, we'll know immediately. If they're signaling, we keep our men alive and avoid writing history with a key. Savitsky slammed a fist against a bulkhead and gave the order. Tanks roared, plates creaked. The bow rose. The surface was a riot of light and noise. Helicopters, rotor wash, flares, flags, loud hailers in English. Sailors staggered into sun like men waking in a furnace. Americans saw a black hull ringed by white wakes, men on deck, no guns firing. Signals moved. There was no boarding, no ramming, no shot. Above, officers read discipline. Below, a crew sucked air like a drug. The special stayed in its safe. Impact rippled long after the wake flattened. The US Navy thought it was tapping Morse. The Soviets heard fists. The gap wasn't cultural flourishes, it was doctrine under heat. Washington didn't know nuclear torpedoes rode under its destroyers. The rules of engagement had never been tested against a boat that could erase a task group in one blast. Add the unknown, and signaling looks like playing with matches in a dry forest. A microscene sits aft in B-59. Torpedo men stood by when the word came to prepare. Paper seals on tools broke. A crewman stared at the green hatch that separated them from the special and felt his stomach heave. Then the runner slid in with the count order, hold. The hatch stayed closed. He exhaled without meaning to. Years later, in a small apartment, he told a nephew he'd never again hear a door click without remembering that hinge. Meanwhile, the other 3 Foxtrots were running the same gauntlet. B, dodging contact patterns, B-130 nursing bad batteries, B-4 slipping under layers like a hunted animal. Any of them could have reached for the same safe in the same heat. On B-59, unanimity and one man's resistance caught the slide. On the others, the combination was different. That's how narrow the margin was. Clarify the record. Arkhipov didn't save the world with a speech. He used a procedural veto, experience from a reactor accident, and a gambler's nose for when momentum lies. He bought 10 minutes, then an hour, then enough daylight to keep a key from turning. In later years, when archives opened, officials in Washington learned for the first time that the variable even existed. McNamara's reaction to the nuclear torpedo detail was simple horror. The Navy's playbook looked different, with a 10-15 kiloton asterisk. The boat slid back under and away. Elsewhere, letters moved, inspections began, cranes lifted missiles into crates. But the fuse people talk about wasn't just diplomatic. It ran through a compartment that smelled like diesel and metal, where 3 men decided whether a thud meant signal or war. The answer that day was air and restraint. It could have been a flash. The invasion that wasn't. ORTSAC and the generals push. OB-59 gasped on the surface, Washington's pencils sharpened into bayonets. ORTSAC, Castro backwards, wasn't clever wordplay. It was a layered plan. OPLAN 312 for airstrikes, 314 for invasion, 316 for accelerated timing if the clock collapsed. The Joint Chiefs wanted more than missiles gone. They wanted the problem removed at the roots. Stakes ran hot in that room. Curtis LeMay had SAC cocked, B-52s and B-47s ready to erase runways and SAMs. Maxwell Taylor worked the ground scheme. Marines eyed beaches east of Havana, Tarara and Kojima, while the Army slated armored spearheads through Mariel. Airborne divisions, the 82nd and 101st, rehearsed drops to seize San Antonio de los Banos and Jose Marti airfields. In their heads, it was Normandy with jets and better weather. Action lived in the checklists. OPLAN 312 started with suppression of enemy air defenses, F-105s, F-100s, Navy A-4s and A-6s, pounding SA-2 radars, fuel farms, MiG pens. Follow-on waves would crater runways, hunt mobile targets, and blind radars long enough for paratroopers to fall through the gaps. OPLAN 314 mapped the landings. Marines through surf, armor rolling from LSDs, engineers clearing obstacles, airborne brigades linking with beachmasters under smoke. OPLAN 316 tightened everything. 5 days from green light to jumps, amphibious waves hitting 3 days later. On charts, it was crisp. Meanwhile, their assumptions were wrong. Intelligence put Soviet troop strength at 10 to 12,000. The island actually held over 40,000 Soviet combat troops, plus Cuban regulars and militia. The chiefs assumed Cuban morale would crack under shock. Cuban doctrine wrote the opposite. Operation Cactus layered kill zones along every likely landing. Bridges wired for demolition, fuel caches set to burn rather than feed in advance. Complication hid inside crates the Pentagon hadn't counted, tactical nuclear weapons. FKR-1 coastal cruise missiles sighted within reach of those beaches. Lunar rockets positioned to smash staging areas and captured airfields. 6 nuclear gravity bombs for IL-28s if runways stayed intact. In EXCOMM, those details didn't exist. On the island, Soviet officers measured arcs toward names that matched the Americans' beach lists. A micro-story sits in a hangar at Fort Bragg. A jumpmaster from the 82nd tapes a drop alt on a bulkhead, 800 feet, and walks his stick, tapping helmets. He's flown over smoke in training. He hasn't flown through an SA-2 belt with crews who've already taken a U-2. He looks at a photo of San Antonio de los Baños and sees a flat rectangle. A lunar crew 10 kilometers away sees a target box. While that was happening stateside, Guantanamo readied for war. A-4 Skyhawks warmed on the line. Marines studied inland ridges where Cuban mortars could bracket them. Offshore at Viks and Onslow Beach, practice landings ran under a name nobody said aloud, ORTSAC, turning rehearsal into muscle memory. Leaflets sat in crates, Spanish warnings telling civilians to shelter as liberation arrived. An occupation proclamation waited in a safe, complete with curfews and weapons turn-ins. It assumed stunned compliance. Impact of those blind spots would have been immediate. First-wave Marines under white surf at Tarará, then a white flash from an FKR warhead raking a beachhead. Paratroopers landing on a runway already targeted by a lunar battery. Guantanamo itself inside a short-range crosshair. The chiefs promised low losses if surprise held. Surprise would have detonated the tripwire. Parallel pressure pressed Kennedy. The Maysaid blockade was weakness. Air power could clean the table in a day. Taylor assured him the Army would finish what the Air Force started. RFK kept pushing the moral frame, Pearl Harbor without a declaration. McNamara kept drawing ladders with rungs the president could stand on. The president held the hinge. He could turn ORTSAC from paper to surf with a phone call. Unknown to the chiefs, Soviet command on the island baked in predelegation for tactical use if cut off and facing invasion. Jam radios, sever wires, decapitate HQs, the very goals of a smart air campaign, and authority would slide to officers at the gun line with code words and standing orders to repel. Every American success would tighten the trigger. Another micro-story. In a tent near Remedios, a Soviet officer explains by gestures to Cuban militianos where the kill zone lies. He points at a map marked with American beach names he pronounces poorly. He doesn't need the word ORTSAC to understand what's coming. He needs timing, and he's rehearsed for hours. Complications stacked as new U-2 frames rolled in, more MRBM sites, deeper SAM rings, transporters dispersing. Pilots could blind radars and crater strips, but nothing in the folders showed the small launchers under nets. The chief still leaned hard. Kennedy told them the quarantine buys time and leverage. They filed objections and kept transports warm. Impact, if the green light had flashed, would have outpaced politics. Soviet personnel killed in the first strikes would drive Moscow to act somewhere it could, Berlin first. Tactical detonations on Cuban soil would yank strategic air command up the ladder. The plan's neat arrows would smear into a white dome over a beach and a weak nobody could control. The invasion that wasn't stayed that way because the president refused momentum. ORTSAC lived and died on paper. Ships held station instead of charging beaches. Paratroopers stayed on benches, chewing gum they expected to spit out over Cuba. The generals' push never reached the waterline. The brakes held just long enough for a different path to open, one that required back channels, face saving, and a secret promise tucked into a calendar halfway around the world. The shoot-downs, U-2 over Cuba and a near miss over Siberia. Dawn on October 27, 1962, comes thin and metallic. Major Rudolph Anderson seals into his pressure suit at McCoy Air Force Base, the ritual steady. Oxygen hose click, visor down, checklist monotone. His job is simple to say and lethal to do. Climb a U-2 above 70,000 feet, cross Cuba, bring back the frames that settle arguments in Washington. SA-2 sites below aren't symbols anymore. They're crews with orders and a contrail to watch. The stakes ride his wings. Each photo tightens targeting folders or buys hours for bargaining. Each pass over a radar fan gives a Soviet battery commander time to search, acquire, steady. Anderson lifts and climbs into blue so thin it looks brittle. The island spreads like a map beneath him. San Cristobal's ribs, Saguilar Grand scars, Baines, geometry turning from ink to metal. Action arrives over the east. On the ground near Baines, Soviet air defense officers see the forbidden needle cut across their sky. Senior 75 guidance radar locks on. Orders come fast, shaped by a week of tension and a doctrine that reads violate and we fire. Two SA-2s rise, long, white, and blind to politics. One detonates close. Shrapnel rips the U-2's skin, slashes Anderson's suit, blows the cabin's pressure into nothing. He can't feel the fall. The aircraft breaks into a descent. No human can fly. Impact lands in a room that already hums. A courier hands a flimsy. U-2 lost over Cuba, pilot presumed down. The cabinet room stiffens. Curtis LeMay doesn't need a second sentence. In his head, Sam's firing on an American aircraft means immediate strikes. Maxwell Taylor echoes. The chiefs see confirmation of their warnings. Cuba isn't a chessboard, it's a shooting gallery. Kennedy holds the impulse with a palm and a look. McNamara asks two blunt questions. Was this from Moscow, and what happens when we answer? Meanwhile, the but therefore chain tightens. The shoot-down is an outrage, but if they hit back, they'll kill Soviets. Therefore, Khrushchev may answer in Berlin or worse. RFK speaks the moral line the room can't escape, Pearl Harbor. Kennedy decides, no retaliatory strike today. Keep the quarantine hard. Signal resolve. Hold space for a deal that now has to account for blood. Thousands of miles north, a second fuse hisses. A U-2 weather flight out of Eielson in Alaska drifts off course, jet streams and celestial fixes conspiring to push it over the Chukotka Peninsula into Soviet airspace. On Soviet scopes, a bright dot crosses a line. MiGs scramble. In Alaska, F-102s launch to shepherd their stray home. On their rails, Genie rockets with nuclear warheads designed to tear bomber formations apart in a radiant cone. Controllers talk fast. Bearings, angels, bingo, fuel. For minutes that feel like hours, nuclear-armed aircraft close on nuclear-armed interceptors in the polar sky, each side following orders that don't include panic. The F-102s find the lost glider, bracket it, and guide it south as the MiGs peel at the border. The near-war nobody hears about ends because men follow, do not fire to the comma. Back in Washington, the double jolt cuts grooves. LeMay presses, Sam's sights must go now. McNamara draws ladders again, rungs you can stand on without falling through. The Navy reports ships slowing, turning, stopping under the quarantine. Pressure is working. Then the name arrives, Major Rudolph Anderson, confirmed dead. Kennedy writes to his widow and stares at the sentence he can't change. Grief is private. The calculus stays public. Don't turn one loss into a statistic with too many zeros. What nobody in EXCOMM fully grasps that afternoon, the shoot-down likely wasn't a Kremlin order. Local Soviet commanders in Cuba, understanding directives and fear, took a shot they were trained to take. Khrushchev will later say he didn't intend it. That gap, doctrine meeting adrenaline, keeps widening while letters between capitals try to sow a seam. Micro-moments fix the day in muscle and memory. In the Arctic twilight, a ground crew chief slides a safety pin back into a Genie and leans against a tire until his hands stop shaking. In Florida, an RF-101 pilot stares at a snapshot of two kids before he straps in for a low-level run that might meet an SA-2 fan. At Baines, a radar operator watches the afterglow fade on his scope and pretends his fingers aren't trembling on the console. Meanwhile, the back channel opens because the cliff edge finally looks like a cliff. Robert Kennedy sits across from Anatoly Dobrynin and offers the shape. Remove the missiles. We pledge not to invade. And quietly, the Jupiters in Turkey go in months. Without Anderson's death, urgency might not harden that fast. With it, both leaders feel how little slack remains. The day ends with two brushes against fire. One that killed a pilot, one that could have sparked a skywide misunderstanding over Siberia. The quarantine holds. Bomb bays stay shut. The letters that will end this begin to find their tone, one personal, one steely. Black Saturday earns its name not because the system worked cleanly, but because men held their hands in place while rage and fear tried to move them. Back channels and bargains, letters, leaks, and the Turkey missiles. By nightfall on October 27, the public board looked frozen.